Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome here. Thank you for having us with you. This panel is a panel which we run for Luxembourg for Business, so you will see a number of Luxembourgers on this panel. This is no chauvinism, but that's the way we are. We are small, but we are there. The subject of today is data harboring and the trend towards national clouds. Is that a missed opportunity or a viable alternative? And in order to discuss this topic, which, according to us, does not get the international or the national attention it should get, I have a number of friends and guests with me. Number one is Lorenz Mais. Lorenz is from Telendus in Luxembourg, in charge of international business development in the cloud field. He has 15 years of experience. Have a seat, Lorenz.
Thank you.
15 years of experience in the ICT sector and joined Telendus in 2013. He was responsible for operations, business development, and consulting management in highly competitive divisions of the data center and cloud service. He is not a meteorologist, but he believes that the cloud does it, will do it, and that the cloud should do what customers need and want from the cloud. Welcome, Lorenz.
Thank you.
Number two on the panel is Amy Sandoval. Amy is a San Francisco Bay Area native, so she is the one who really knows how things are and how they are done in the Bay and around the Bay. She has been working for a number of EU governments in government relations towards the Bay Area, the startups in the Bay Area, etc., etc. So she does have a confirmed knowledge about that. Today she is at EBRC, is one of the biggest data center and cloud service providers in Luxembourg, and she is in charge of international business development. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
Then we have Marco Houwen. Marco is just a serial. He is a serial grandpa of a number of things in the data center, in the cloud business. Marco was at the cradle of Lucix, of Lux Cloud, of EuroDNS, and so forth. And every once in a while he is a serial killer because he can tell a few jokes which really kill. So welcome, Marco. Then we have on the panel David Sneed. David Sneed is the general counsel of cPanel. You already have seen him because he basically rushes from panel to panel, a very, very asked man. David is also the co-founder of the I2 Coalition, which is a representative body of those people who, as David says, are in charge of the nuts and bolts, obviously the virtual nuts and bolts, because we are in the internet economy here, of the internet and of the networks. Thank you, David, for being on the panel. We will have another member joining us, but sometimes the analog trains miss, so eventually we should try and invest into teleporting to make sure that next time everybody's here. That's where we are. Data harboring and the trend towards national clouds, a missed opportunity or a viable alternative. Who in the audience remembers Duncan Campbell? Ever heard about this guy? Well, Duncan Campbell, to a certain extent, was the father of Edward Snowden, because Duncan Campbell basically revealed what Edward Snowden came up with 25 years ago. That was the Echelon affair. Everybody has forgotten about it. That is opportunism, and that is, to a certain extent, also policy, because you sleep better ignoring things rather than addressing them and confronting them. After, obviously, Echelon, after Snowden, the next step which came was WikiLeaks, LuxLeaks, and all that. And all that basically told us that what we commonly said as being the asset or the currency, the money of the next century, that is data, became a completely new meaning and got a completely new orientation. Countries have not waited for Snowden to come up in order to develop new business models and companies too, towards what one could call today data nationalization or national segregation of data. In doing so, obviously, the interest was to pretend or to say or to document that data saved and stored nationally are better protected than anywhere else. France have initiatives like that, Germany has an initiative like that, and a number of other countries. And all that, obviously, confronts with the European Union's Digital Single Market Initiative, where, again, a European cloud is one of the top topics, and where avoiding or ending barriers to trade, to data flows, et cetera, are on the top agenda. So this is basically the big framework in which I would like to discuss a number of things with my panel members. If we find some time, depending on how enthusiastic you will be about the panel, if we find some time afterwards, we will try and make sure that you have 2 or 3 minutes for Q&A. Marco, my first question goes to you. If speaking about national cloud initiatives, or speaking about initiatives basically segregating data so as to make sure that certain data are stored only nationally on the one side, or speaking about European clouds or European cloud initiatives at the EU level, are that viable models? Are we ever running into or having the critical mass, the size sufficient in order to be able to then have a viable cloud economy based on that?
Well, I think that's the whole topic of this discussion, so I cannot answer it in a second.
Well, you're the grandfather on the topic, so.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm not. But I think it's a matter of size of the country. If Germany would decide that there would be only a cloud in Germany and they would segregate that for the German market, well, could maybe work for them in a very protectionism way of doing. Would totally seclude them for any other business, but hey, it could work. But in the way how internet is organized today, and in the way how the economic flows are working in the world, it is absolutely illusional to think that you are able to set up a cloud which you would put only in a country. What we will see is mixtures of some VMware instances in a country where some data has to stay in that country, but then having the rest distributed over whatever other cloud which is available and distributed over the world.
Amy, quick question. You coming from the US, I mean, when you hear that a continent, between inverted commas, like Europe, comparable size, comparable market to the US, with all due respect, how does that sound to somebody like you when we speak about segregation? I mean, it's like if tomorrow Wyoming were to say, we're going to have a Wyoming cloud, we're going to have a California cloud, a Texas cloud, and eventually a Washington, D.C. cloud. Does that, I mean...
Well, I think from a startup perspective, for example, if we were looking to move to Europe, then it would be a challenge and think, well, what country should I pick? And am I only going to scale there? And is that going to be my only market? How will this change our business model if we move and pick just one country? So I think it's challenging, but I think it wouldn't make business easily between the US and the EU. So.
Okay, it would basically, to a certain extent, if I'm understanding you right, what it would basically do is it would kind of stress competition among countries instead of creating a big single market, which would then be able to compete with Southeast Asia, the US, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. David, does that competition idea within Europe, between countries, or of Europe versus the US, does that in a certain sense make sense, or is that old school?
It's old school, honestly. National clouds make no sense, from a security standpoint, from a business standpoint, they make absolutely no sense. Businesses compete globally. Infrastructure businesses compete globally, and your companies are deceiving themselves in thinking that if I have this little market to get myself started, that's going to give me some sort of advantage versus, say, a larger incumbent. So, for example, there's this false competition theory that everybody's competing against AWS, right? If we just did something to stabilize our small little guys, they would be able to compete against AWS. The reality is what you need to do is find a way to compete against AWS that is different than AWS, that you're not AWS yourself. So I think that this competition analogy is inaccurate. Nation states aren't competing against each other. Soft layer is competing against AWS. Soft layer is competing against European entities, and soft layer itself has different data centers in Europe and all over the place, and that's where the competition is.
That's a long way to go. I mean, if I see what's out there in the market, Lawrence, you coming from EBRC and you being...
To Linden.
I'm sorry, from Challenges.
To Linden.
Lapsus. That's a very, that is, dear audience, I'm going to pay for that lapsus. Lawrence, apologies. Challenges, as a large cloud service provider, how do you look at those? Being based in Luxembourg, having a focus on Luxembourg, but being active internationally, what is your gut feeling when you see those tendencies of national versus European versus US? How do you position yourself or Challenges in that environment?
Well, first of all, I totally agree. Competition is always good, and to have competition not only on a national level, I mean, we have that here with EBRC, for example. As said, we are competitors, but to have competition even on a broader European base. So it's a good point. Now, when it comes to the building this national cloud that you just mentioned and the initiatives you see there, first of all, I think that throughout Europe we have to improve how cloud services or online services are being consumed. So there is a lot to do on the European market to break up the limitations that are currently there between the different countries. First of all, we would like to have more competition on a European level and also to offer our services on a German level or to France or to other countries. Well, what you just see, the initiatives on a governmental level, and that is, I think, what you're talking about the Bundescloud and these initiatives, that I think it's more driven by the governmental and by governmental authorities. And it's going in a direction to have a digital single market in Europe. And I think that's really worthwhile to work on that and to improve it, to have a single European market. And we are definitely not there yet. That's a lot for us to do and to improve. So if you talk about this digital single market, then you could also raise the question, how digital is your government today? And then it's a good initiative from the German government to go in this Bundescloud direction, because it means to centralize the data, first of all, to rely on service providers. So it's in general just driving their service more in a way to digitize their data and their data flows. And of course, you could now point the finger on them and saying, yeah, but why don't you do that on a more European level like the European Commission does? On the other side, I can completely understand that because they still want to protect their data, at least from the security services. I mean, Germany won't have any interest that their data is getting read by the secret services of UK. And as long as we, for example, don't have a European secret service, then there is still the danger that someone else is reading the data. And that is a bit opposite to the US, where they just have the NSA.
Yes. Well, a single European secret service, that's probably a thing nobody has thought about. But that's why we are here. I mean, Lawrence, with all due respect, and thank you for having tossed that big stone into that small pond we are sitting around here. But true, it's probably because the level of integration in Europe has never reached the level it has reached in the US, that we are looking at data differently from country to country. Now, that being said, you said a few things which I would like to toss back to the other panel members. One is, you said we need to work on the way cloud is used in Europe. Does that mean we have to do something about take-up? Do you think that Europe still is way back in terms of taking up cloud services? And if so, why?
I just want to add some point to it. If you see how online services are currently consumed in Europe, then you see that 42% are bought within one country, 54% are being consumed at US companies, and only 4% are cross-border purchases throughout Europe. So you see that we really have an issue here with European cross-border online services and how they are getting consumed. And I think we really have to improve there. There should not be any issue that I'm being in France, buying a product in Germany, get it shipped for a good condition and have the same data privacy regulation. We really need to improve on this point. That should not be any issue to buy in another European member state at all.
Well, unfortunately,
Okay.
unfortunately, we still have different languages in Europe, but that's the main stopper here. Because if you want to buy as a German in France, well, you have to speak French, because they will probably not offer you do you the offer in English. So I think that's one of the major challenges we are facing. And yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of cloud, that's true. And by the way, what you're alluding to, Lawrence, that's one of the biggest or the big chunks in the digital single market agenda, that is getting away with those barriers which nobody can really understand. I mean, if you're buying, Luxembourg is a very good example. Why do so many Luxembourgers buy on the internet and have the stuff delivered to friends and buddies in Germany, in France, or in Belgium? Simply because the last mile, between inverted commas, costs exorbitantly high in terms of delivery, cost of delivery, so that very often if you buy something small like a CD, a book or something like that, the cost of delivery can go up to 20, 25 to 30% of the value of the merchandise, which is completely nuts. But that's certainly a part, but let me get back into, I would say, the cloudier part of our discussion today. Marco, in relation to what Lawrence said on working on the take-up, working on people getting to the cloud and having an open relationship with the cloud, what would you see as on the agenda in order to walk into that direction?
Well, if you compare, and now we have to talk about different clouds. So if you talk about the classical AWS cloud services or infrastructure as a services, I think, yes, maybe Europe is lagging a little bit behind, but there's a lot of use of these kind of solutions in Europe, and I don't see so much of a lagging behind from an internet business standpoint of view. Maybe on the financial sector and so on, that's a different point. But if you're talking about software as a service, the US didn't have or never had this channel approach, or the same channel approach and value-added reseller approach as it was as it is installed in Europe, and that makes the take-up just more difficult. And I can prove that during my experience of a Lux Cloud, which that takes enormous of time, because you don't have to convince the end user. First, you have to convince this reseller to use and to sell, and then he has to convince his customers. So it makes it just more difficult to do. What we see today, and that's also out of the experience, is that it is just growing and people are moving into it. Mainly in this space also since Microsoft launched Office 365, which was a huge buzz, and people say, oh, well, why do I need my small business server? Oh yeah, anyhow I cannot buy it anymore, so I move it into Office 365. Still I want to work with my partner. Now Microsoft moved into CSP, so you have the possibility to buy it through your partner, your Office 365. So yes, the take-up is now coming, and it has, due to the structure of the organization, of the organizing of the market, it just took a delay. That's how I see it.
David, any thoughts from you on the side of the take-up, and specifically, because something which one always and recurringly hears when speaking about cloud and companies using cloud services, et cetera, is that the fear of where are my data and who has and who may not, and how am I going to, in case the cloud provider goes bust, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that psychological element of fear really something which still blocks, or have we overcome that meanwhile in the cloud industry? And going from there, again, obviously fear translates into security and safety of data. Right. Is there still something up, or are we over that?
So sure. There's fear, and this fear, I think everybody in this industry has confronted at one time or another, right? So 6 or 7 years ago, we were talking about server huggers, and we've kind of gone on to the cloud, and people want to know where my data is. There are a couple of answers to that question. The answer from a commercial standpoint is you do what your customers want, right? Your customers want to know where their data is. You give them the opportunity to know where their data is, or you disclose that you're moving it from place to place. But the second issue of fear is, I think it's solved not by creating this artificial construct that data has a nationality or that data has a location. It's solved by security, right? It's solved by ensuring that data that you don't want somebody to have access to isn't accessible. I mean, it is, I think, a fallacy for the US government, the German government, to say, we have to put this data in our national borders because it's going to be more secure just because it's in the US. It is just as accessible if it's somehow transmitted as it would be any place else if it's not secured properly. So dealing with fear, I think, is addressed by security and not by location.
Yep. I think our missing panel member is there. Michel Ackermann. Welcome, Michel.
Yes, hello. I was not coming with a cloud, but just with a train.
No. But we will, as I said, I will make sure you guys invest into teleporting, because everybody since Star Trek knows that teleporting resolves issues with trains being late. Michel Ackermann is a strategic consultant, can one say that way, at
Yes.
EBRC. Say a word about what you're doing so I don't have to do it at EBRC. What's that?
Please, can you repeat it?
As I just said, say a word about what you're doing at EBRC, so I don't have to present you quickly.
My dream.
You're doing your dream.
The biggest cloud.
The biggest cloud. Okay. Well, hopefully it doesn't rain while we are still outside, but we will see that. Michel, or let me first toss a question to Amy. We were speaking about that component of fear. Now, you, from your experience in the Bay Area, is that something which startups work with? I have the impression that they have a completely different approach to the cloud, the potentialities of the cloud, and the risks, between inverted commas, of the cloud. How could you explain that? Why is that? Is that a matter of generation, maturity of business?
No, I think, it's been around already, but it's been brought up again because of the whole Snowden NSA thing. And recently for example, with Apple and the FBI, Apple said no to the FBI wanting to get into the San Bernardino shooter's iPhone. And it's a good stance to take, because it's not something that we have to first respect. Companies have to respect citizens' privacy, and they have to respect their data. I agree that we need a free flow of data between the US and the EU, but there has to be a respect on it. And companies like Apple, who are standing against the FBI trying to open up the iPhone of this guy, it's kind of setting the tone that companies are respecting the data of Apple iPhone users or who are using their Apple products. And I think that I know that with the digital single market in Europe, they're trying to make it stronger here for Europeans' rights, that their data is not being accessed in a way that they don't want. So it's it's a conversation that's also been really important in the U.S. and in Silicon Valley. And recently, I actually read that last month, the EU and the US now developed a stronger framework on the EU-US Privacy Shield, where they're outlining how they're going to monitor European data crossing the Atlantic, what they're going to do with it, and how they're going to work with the European data authorities each month to see, well, how is this data being used? So it's not something that's new, it's something that's really relevant, and I think that slowly Europe is on the way on working on it, but I think they still have a long way to go.
Yeah, no, go.
Actually, I think, to come back to what David said before, I think it's extremely important. Security and the encryption side is extremely important, and the stance Apple is taking against the FBI, as you mentioned, I think it's just remarkable. That would have never happened 5 years ago, before Snowden time, and it is happening, in my opinion, well, because of the financial and the economic pressure the American multinationals are getting, because all the other ones outside of the US are saying, hey guys, we are also humans, and we have our beliefs, and you have to respect that. And they are taking their stance now, and I think that's a positive evolution. So the whole data nation sovereignty discussion is void if we are having a clear point on encryption and saying that everybody has the right to have his data and everybody has the right to have his privacy. Then we are in a world where you not necessarily need to discuss where your data are residing. So I think from a large standpoint, that's how you could see it.
Michel, Marco spoke about data integrity and the fact that it's not necessarily important once a certain common understanding or a common level playing field exists, if I can interpret what you said, Marco, accordingly. It is not really important where your data are. You at EBRC having a very strong focus on the financial sector, et cetera, can you share that view, or do you have a feeling that still also from the financial sector side, people have a tendency of, well, they want to know basically the mailbox where their data lies in, or the server their data is on?
First, I will just extend the concept from financial to sensitive sector, incorporating healthcare, for example, like financial. It's very important because if you look today, the trend on the market for the data is at the center of the activity. It's a big value for the company. If you look, just an example, Windows 10, it's a free version because the consumer is the real data.
Yes.
It's a transformation. But the cloud will integrate the data, and the data and its treatment, it's a value for the company, and it's very important to know where is the data. And if you look at a border, it can just look like a rule. It's interesting for you, human people, to have a rule, because we need rule. We need to know where our data are, or we will have access to our data, how we will treat this data, what to do with it today, but also for a long period. If you look at the health sector, we will have, with the health, a specific long-term archiving for the data.
Yes, yes. We have another 50 seconds, so any questions? I would like to thank you, because this is a discussion which obviously we can continue, but according to the good old German saying, when it is nicest and best, one better stops. Any questions out there in the audience? If so, please wait before you get a mic. Stand up and tell us your name and the company you're coming from. Any questions? Everything's crystal clear? Luxembourg gave you the best insight into data harboring and the tricky issues about national clouds versus European clouds. Well then, with the clock ticking down, thank you very much to you as the audience. Thank you very much to the panel members. You will find them all around here. So if you want to deepen the discussion with one or the other of them, feel free to do so. Thank you very much. Merci vielmals from Luxembourg, and see you soon on some other stage. Thank you.